On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1993. We're going to be taking a look at Julie Andrews, and she's going to be performing The Sound of Music. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So I did a video on Julie last week, and I did say that I'd follow it up with another one just to get the history in there as well, because there is so much history to Julie Andrews, but also we'll look at some of the points that I brought up in that first video about vowel modifications, because that is something that did pop up in the comments section as well. But let's get Julie up on screen and we'll see how she gets on.
Like the wings of the birds that rise from the lake to the trees. My heart wants to sigh like a chime that flies from a church on a breeze. To laugh like a brook when it trips and falls over stones on its way. To sing through the night like a lark who is learning to pray. I go to the hills when my heart is lonely. I know I will hear what I've heard before. Like a brook when it trips and falls over stones on its way. To sing through the night like a lark who is learning to
And there we have it. There is so much that can be pointed out in this performance, but we are going to go back to the other performance that I looked at in that first video to point out just one thing about that as well. But Julie Andrews' enunciation is second to none. When you're listening to her perform, every single word, there's no mistake that can be made as to which word it is, what the meaning of the song is, and especially when you're talking about classical singing, all of the vowel modifications that singers go through in classical music and classical theatre, it all comes from Italian. So it means that the original Italian words were the words that were being changed into these easier to sing vowels, or at least modifications that would be applied to the vowels. So it means that once you start applying those vowel modifications to different languages, the words can suffer. And this is where Julie Andrews was just in a different class, being able to apply those vowel modifications, but the word is still crystal clear because of the control that she had, but the subtlety with which she applied those modifications to the English words. Also to mention that it is Andre Previn, the conductor here, if you did recognize him. This whole performance is so well put together, such great arrangements in there. I've jumped through this whole video pretty much for the whole of today, just looking at different performances because Julie is just spot on the whole way through. So putting the vowel modifications under the spotlight, I've got the previous performance that I looked at in that other video up on screen because we're going to be listening to the last two words of the song, which are all night. And when you get to the top of your range, and especially in classical singing, classical technique, that is where the vowel modifications are most evident, because in order to get higher in your range, you have to thin out the sound, and therefore you can't have really wide open vowels because you'll start to bring chest up too high. I'm talking about your chest register, and then you can damage the voice. But the last two words that we're going to hear are all night, and I want you to listen to them as carefully and closely as you can, because hopefully you'll be able to spot the vowel modifications. So, with those last two words, you'll find that the first word, all, is quite a closed vowel already. It's not really open. So, when we get the all, as soon as we go into night, all Julie does is say the N consonant and then keeps the same vowel modification or sound that she had in all. So it turns into all nor. And then the applause comes in. We never hear the end of the word, but Julie would have just modified that at the end in order to say all noit. And there will be a little oit at the end so that people now know it's the word night. But the other advantage that Julie has here is that she sung the all-night phrase throughout the whole song. So everybody knows what the word is already, and they're not analysing the pronunciation, the enunciation, and the vowel modifications that are happening. Another great indicator of the vowel being sung is the mouth position, because when you're singing a wider vowel, for example, all is quite closed. As you can see, my mouth is quite long, whereas when I say night, especially the second half of night, things really do open up. And saying all night, there's a definite smile that comes in when you say night. So, with Julie, you'll notice that her mouth position doesn't change. She says all nor, and just look at her mouth position. Obviously, when you are singing out super high like Julie could, the vowel modifications that are being applied across the board. She's got that sweet spot, and she doesn't want that vowel to start moving at the back of her throat to a wider vowel, because then she won't be able to get the note. And it's the same vowel modification that is being applied the whole time. But let's have a look at Julie's mouth with these two words that are being sung. And there we have it. So that straight position, quite a low draw as well, in order to really thin out that vowel so that she can stay so high up in her head voice and get such a great sound, the tone, the resonance as well. This is something that Julie had in her voice. It's almost as if in the last performance that we just watched, which we will analyze as well, you can hear it's almost like feedback because of the resonance that she gets in her head from those top notes. Anyway, I thought I'd get that previous video up on screen because people in the comment section were a little bit confused as to the vowel modifications that Julie used, and they are so hard to spot because she does it so well. So jumping back into the previous performance, something that I want to point out as well is the way that Julie changes to the oo vowel, and especially on I go, it's very much an I goo is the sound that she changes to. She does it later on in the song as well, but we'll have a listen to the first part and see if you can spot this. Let's have a little listen.
Learning to pray,
And there it is. The thing is, Julie is so good at doing this that you won't notice it, but there's a definite change from the I goo, and it's almost a goo that's going in there, maybe a goo with a hint of an R in there, goo, but it is so well modified. Obviously, this isn't super high in her range, but these little things that she does is just so subtle but brilliant at the same time because you don't notice it. The oo vowel that Julie is going to is so much more of a head voice vowel. Whereas when you start shouting and going, ah, it's a really open sound. As soon as you go, oh, it's a lot less offensive, making an oo sound rather than an R sound. Just a quick example, going, mama, ooh. If the line, and that's from Bohemian Rhapsody, if you don't notice it, because I was singing so bad, but if you take that line, mama, ah, and you do an R, the R has got exactly the same expression and personality as the first line that we heard, so there's no light and shade, whereas the mama, ooh, we've got something different there. Just by changing the vowel, it means that it's going to be a softer sound because the oo vowel is resonating in the head and it's a very pure tone, whereas the R vowel, if you take that R vowel and lean into it, especially higher up in your range, you might even start to get a bit of rasp in that sound because it is such an open vowel. And this is where a little bit of vocal damage can happen if you start taking open vowels up too high and leaning into them too much. But that oo vowel, especially in the example that I've just given, it's a softer reply to that previous line that we've heard. So you do get that difference in emotion and feeling, even though we're not saying a word after mama. Another thing to mention is that this was when Julie was 58 years of age. So with some singers, you do find that they lose a little bit of range, a little bit of power as their vocal cords become slightly more fragile and less flexible. But with Julie, she just hits all of the notes dead on throughout this whole performance, the whole 53, almost 54 minutes. So it's definitely worth a watch. And if you're looking at this performance, it's the first performance of the night, and it really does set the scene because this just blows your socks off, and we've got another 50 odd minutes of this kind of quality. So getting into Julie's history, she had a difficult start to things because she lived in a bad slum area of London, and she has said herself that that was a dark time in her life, but fortunately her stepfather and her mother's stage careers took off a little bit more after that, so they did manage to move. Her stepdad sponsored lessons for her at an independent art school, and that then changed into being known as Arts Ed in London. She also started getting voice lessons from Lillian Stars Allen, the soprano and voice instructor, and Lillian was a huge influence on Julie, and it is something that Lillian said about Julie, that she had perfect pitch, even though Julie said in her autobiography in 2008 that she doesn't have perfect pitch, but that is something that Lillian thought of her. And Julie described her voice at that age as pure, thin, and having 4 octaves. Something that Julie did when she was young was go to bed really early so that she could wake up and then perform with her parents on stage in the evening. It was something that wasn't billed, but she would get up there, stand on a box and sing into the microphone, and it was very popular. At this time as well, she then toured Britain with Petula Clark, and I do have a video on Petula here somewhere, so you can check that out independently if you want. Her big break came when her stepfather introduced her to Val Parnell, and he was part of Moss Empires, and they controlled all of the prominent venues in London. So she made her professional debut in 1947 at age 12, and she also became the youngest ever performer at the Royal Variety Performance at the age of 13. She was also appearing on TV from 1950 to 1952, and just for reference, in 1950 she would have been 15 years of age, and she was also appearing on the West End stage. In 1954, at the age of 19, she made her Broadway debut, and that was in The Boyfriend, followed that up by starring in My Fair Lady, and she was also signed to appear with Bing Crosby in High Tour, which was a made-for-television film. She starred in a television musical version of Cinderella, and that was seen by an estimated 107 million people, and she also received an Emmy nomination for that as well. In 1957, she released her debut solo album, and that was called The Lass with the Delicate Air. In the late 50s and early 60s, Julie appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, as well as many other TV shows, and then the movie version of My Fair Lady was in the works, so it seemed obvious that Julie would play that leading role because of her history with the musical and playing that so well, singing it so well. But Jack Warner went for Audrey Hepburn because of her box office pull. So that was a disappointment for Julie, but it did mean that she was available to be in Mary Poppins. This is something that Walt Disney himself had seen Julie and thought that she would be perfect to play this role. The only problem was that she was pregnant at the time, and she said, I have to go back to England, I'm going to have my child, and Walt Disney said, that's fine, we'll wait for you. So they started filming Mary Poppins in 1963. So when the movie was released in 1964, it became the biggest box office draw in Disney history. Also, it won an Academy Award and Golden Globe. And the interesting thing about that is when Julie gave her acceptance speech for the Golden Globe, she thanked Jack Warner for making it all possible. So a little bit of a dig there, but understandably so. And in 1964, she starred in the Americanization of Emily. So it was 1965 when The Sound of Music was released, and it was the highest grossing film of that year, but also it's the third highest grossing film of all time still. So that was quite a popular one. She was massively successful throughout the 60s and had her own TV show in the early 70s. That was between 1972 and 1973 called The Julie Andrews Hour, and that was on the ABC network over in the USA. That show went on to win 7 Emmy Awards, and she recorded 5 variety specials for the same network. She also did 2 more movies in the 70s, and in 1980 she did a lot of charity work, and that was for Because We Care, which raised money for Cambodian famine victims. In 1980, she starred in Little Miss Marker, and in 1981, she starred in SOB, and in 1982, she starred in Victor Victoria. She was nominated for an Academy Award and an Oscar, and also won a Golden Globe for her performance in that film. She made a lot more movies in the 80s and was still a massive draw at the box office during that time. In 1987, her Christmas special won 5 Emmy Awards, and in 1991, she starred in Our Sons, and that was a made-for-TV film. She also had her own sitcom and hosted NBC specials. In 1993, she starred in Putting It Together, and that was run at the Manhattan Theatre Club, so she was still doing theatre work at this time. And in 1994 and 1995, she recorded 2 solo albums, and was now starring in the stage musical version of Victor Victoria. And this was in 1995. And unfortunately, in 1997 is when she had to quit that show because she was having problems with her voice. I did mention this in the first video that I did on Julie about her developing a hoarseness to her voice due to a strain. That's how it has been described, and that would be totally understandable if she is singing night after night after night on stage and hitting these crazy notes, having such a wide range as she has. It's understandable that she might have done a little bit of vocal damage while performing, but unfortunately, it was something that was diagnosed as a nodule on the vocal cords. So they decided to operate. And I'm sure that also there was a lot of pressure because of Julie Andrews' voice and the amount of people that she could bring along to a show and how much of a draw she was. Obviously, if she's not singing, then companies aren't making money. So there might have been some pressure for the surgery to go ahead. But anyway, the surgery was to remove a non-cancerous nodule. But then they realized that it wasn't a nodule, or at least that's what Julie has said. It was a muscular striation, and it wasn't anything to do with cancer or nodules. It was just something that maybe just would have taken some rest, and that's generally what is the best advice, just total vocal rest if you do damage your vocal cords. But she went in for surgery and it wasn't successful. The doctors in the hospital at the time said that she would have her voice back to what it was 6 weeks after the operation. Of course, that didn't happen. So Julie sued the hospital and the doctors for malpractice, and that was settled in the year 2000 for an undisclosed amount. Since the year 2000, she's had 4 more operations to help improve her speaking voice. Unfortunately, the singing voice never has returned, but the following surgeries were carried out at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she's done a lot of voice rehabilitation, of course, as I'm sure you understand. But in 2001, she starred in The Princess Diaries. She still has kept busy, and she also starred in the sequel, where she sang for the first time since her operation. In 2003, she made her debut as theatre director for The Boyfriend. She's also been in 3 Shrek movies, and when I say that, I mean doing the voiceovers. And in 2008, she released part 1 of her biography, which was called Home, a Memoir of My Early Years. In 2008, she had a short tour of the USA, and during this tour, she did sing for the first time publicly since her operation. And in 2009, she was named as one of the top 10 British actresses of all time, and that was by the Times newspaper here in the UK. And she was massively popular when she returned to singing at the O2 here in London in 2010. Julie has a talent for writing as well, as does her daughter Emma, and they do team up and write children's books together. One of those is called The Very Fairy Princess, which got to number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So they are talented in so many different departments. She also received in 2011 the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. She's also been in the Despicable Me movies, and she did decline to have a cameo in the remake of Mary Poppins, and this is something that I mentioned in the previous video because Julie didn't want to take any of the attention away from Emily Blunt, who starred in that movie. Also, just a final point, if you do get a chance, check out the 2015 performance by Lady Gaga, where Julie Andrews also joins Lady Gaga on stage, because that is a performance and a version of The Sound of Music that you've really got to see because Lady Gaga does such a great job on that, and you can tell that Julie really enjoyed it as well. But thank you guys for suggesting this video and the previous video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!